Be sure to subscribe and like our channel.
Welcome. This is Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole podcast and Queen City Curo and Apothecary videocast. And today we have Shay. And with this, I'll give her an awesome introduction a little bit. However, if you're in Toronto, 607 Gerrard Street East, that's where we're located. Suite 401 for all your metaphysical and supply needs. So today we have Shay. She's been on our podcast previously with Divination and Magic. She's come on with Stephanie Connolly also for one or two podcasts. And today we are going to dive into the goods. We're going to dive into all the fun stuff, which I absolutely love. And it is on the topic of Demonic Necromancy. So with Shaelyn Grey, she has a book. It's called Meditations on Death. That's going to be diving into these topics quite a bit. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
So let's start off with a general premise, because I'm sure people watching are like, what is this combination? Right?
Yeah. And it shouldn't be that kind of a response, because it does go hand in hand, whether you're working with, set pagan deities of death and dying or demonic. They all have that family currents going through them. But I've found that working with the demonic just seems to have a little more of a oomph. Well, that's even kind of making it like a kick in the butt in comparison.
Absolutely. I mean, it is like working with a live wire on that stuff, right?
Yes, it is. And you have to be ready for it.
Well, I mean, demons ain't gonna, fuck around. So this is like it's like you have the current of death, you have a demonology type of current. Those are strong currents. Mm-hmm. So this is where, if someone's a complete noob going into this, where would you start them off working with those two pieces?
Probably the one thing that most newbies hate to hear: self-work and discernment.
Yep.
Because if you're not ready to face your fears, the demonic is going to make sure you do. And we all have inherent fears of death and dying because of that whole unknown. And they will just reflect that back onto your ass time and time again until you either do the work, or sadly, you may run back to a Judeo-Christian perspective again because, oh no, the demons were evil. They scared me, Mom.
Well, even from like the ceremonial magic, I mean, I remember the challenge we did a while back with you guys where I won the Saturn point. I'm like, Cassiel's not much better.
No, that is true. That is true.
So it's like, sure, we can do Western ceremonial magic. The archangels, depending on the sphere of things, they're going to keep you accountable too.
Yes, they are. And I think that's something that, sadly, a lot of people have gotten away from, that accountability and self-accountability. I have started helping a young group, and I hate the name, but baby witches. And none of them want to take, that self-responsibility. It's always something else. And if you're going to get serious, and I don't care whichever path you take and whatever focus you choose, you have to have that sense of, these are my choices, my decision, and whether it's a good ending or a bad ending, it's up to me to own it.
Absolutely. And I think that is like one of the biggest pieces, especially around more of a death current. It's, you have to get it and be like, all right, like this is actually happening. There's no real like, well, maybe it's like, no, it's death currents are that. It's death.
Yeah.
And that can be transformative in many ways and actually healing in many ways.
Very much so. And that's something that I touched upon in the book, is that working with the death demonic does not have to mean you're working with them for the end of life. Like we think of death, a loss of job, a loss of income, a empty nester, Now, those are
Right.
all losses. Your life is no longer the life that you defined yourself as. It's a death.
Hmm. Absolutely. So this is where, if people were to think about particular daemons to work with, where would you go with this? Because I mean, the first one that pops in my mind is Boone, right?
Yeah.
But there's so many more.
Yeah, and Boone can be a little bit of a harsh one, kind of like Murmur. I had the
Hmm.
hardest time with Murmur for a good couple of years until I really did that shadow work. Um, Euronymous, because his energy is a little more forgiving, a little more gentle. He's that wonderful, the gatekeeper. Just help me pass you along from point A to point B. Get used to the current.
Right.
Samagina, I haven't had any problems. I know some people are like, no, that energy is a little bit too sparky for me, but I didn't find it that way. And then my absolute favorite, who I adore, would be Erishkigal. She can have a tough bark
Hmm.
and bite as necessary, but there's a gentleness. I mean, she was known as the mother of the great below. So there is that, motherly energy there, but there's still the you must learn the lessons.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is where I think death has a lot of lessons, and the first thing a lot of people generally would view it, it's like, well, they have that fear. I guess it's that fear of the unknown that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And are you comfortable with that? Because if you're going to talk about necromancy, you have to be comfortable with you yourself dying.
Yeah. You do. And unless you are one of the very few that have gone through a near death experience, you're not going to know what's on the other side. We can read books, we can watch podcasts and videos, but unless you've been there, you don't know it. So it is a terrifying proposition. What if everyone's right and I'm going to go to a really nasty place and burn like it's a barbecue? You have to get over those ingrained fears and controls
Hmm.
and kind of redefine it in your own right.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, we go so many different pieces from this. So, this is where it's like defining your experience with death,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
It's a personal one.
it is very much so. I have had, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I've had that experience 3 times. And each time it was that same energy. So I know it wasn't just the first time of, oh, everything is happiness and light, or
Hmm.
everything is really dark and gray. It was the same energy each time. And it was of a familiarity, but it wasn't angels and trumpets. So, but neither was it a guy with a pitchfork. It was definitely my version of returning to source, that
Right.
familial feeling of, okay, you're back. But now we don't want you because your timing is wrong and we're sending you back out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is, especially from a healing perspective, because Andrea and I, we have the healing center here,
Right.
and it's like those death vibes. I was like, yeah, okay. Most of the time, it's like the dead are around when you're talking about health. It's a illness is a form of death in some
Mhm.
ways, right? So
Yeah.
when you're standing there as a healer, this is where you're like, well, it's not the death vibe,
Right.
but it is where I mean, I've seen so many um, dead spirits and that vibe come around with the healing that I would say it's more common than most people think.
I agree. I agree.
And this is where we start looking at things and what got you, I mean, you have the direct experiences around death,
Mhm.
but what practices helped you kind of get more friendly with it?
A lot of meditation, a
Hmm.
lot of work with the deaf demonic, um, and also doing paranormal research and investigation. You get used to such a wide span of energies. There's like you said, in healing, if you've got something wrong with you, there's a little bit of that death energy there. And working with different spirits that are earthbound, you get the different variations even within them. Where are they? Were they happy to have death happen? Were they surprised? Were they pissed? Are they still pissed? And all of that tinges that energy.
Right. And this is where it comes into pieces like, when I think of specifically, like I'm going more Goetic ceremonial magic on this, it's like you got the pentacles to help you with that, specifically on Saturn. And they have a lot of different aspects. So with that, when I think of that, I always think of Zazel too, which we talked about our own experiences with that.
Yep.
But that was a harsh ride with Zazel when I was doing that working.
Oh yeah.
Like that's a live wire, straight on.
And it's funny how some of them are a little more live than others, and we're talking about death. So it's just that whole juxtaposition of things.
Live death? What?
Live death. What the hell is Shay saying?
So just like from the more viewer standards, like we understand that the demonic are going to be a little bit rougher on that piece with working with the dead and necromantic practices. So why would someone want to work through the demonic to understand death?
Well, if one way to understand death is obviously to commune with the dead. And unless you have an amazing sense of discernment, anything can come through and say it's your Uncle Oscar.
Right.
But if you're working through a daemon or another higher spirit, it kind of acts as the background check. Like you go for a job and you get your fingers done, they're doing the fingerprinting before we get the chance to talk to them. So I know what's coming through is what it is that I'm looking for. Do I want to speak with the deceased? Do I want to speak with an elemental? What is it that I'm looking to commune with and learn from? So yes, you can just go for it, but then we end up with people who don't know how to use their tools properly, Ouija boards, and they end up in trouble.
Yes, there's many times I've heard people like, let's just take a Ouija board to the graveyard. I'm like, you could do that. You'll probably have to come see me afterward. I mean, you're friends of mine. You don't really know what you're doing, but it's all good.
Yeah, go
right?
for it. Have fun.
Go for it. I mean, I would never do that, but you do you.
Yeah, you do you.
So this is where, with that, you've already prefaced in some ways that you need a relationship with the daemon on that point to even go there.
You do. It's not a daemon du jour, although there are a lot of people who do that. And I'm not saying that if you're at a point in your life where you really need a specific demon's energy to get you through it, that you can't reach out and say, I need your guidance.
Right.
But definitely word it like that rather than I want your help. There's
or
a different
get in the triangle.
Exactly. Get in the damn triangle. Get in that circle. I've got my lion pelt. Poor baby. But you do have to build up a relationship, and you do that by working with them a little bit every single day. And you have to give yourself that time. You wouldn't marry someone if you just met them.
Right.
You get to know them. You get to know all about them, what they like, what they don't like, how their views are about things that are important to you. It's the same thing with choosing a daemon to work with. You make sure that you're both aligned in the same direction.
Right, because it's like, everyone's like, daemons are daemons. I'm like, they kind of have different personalities, like, you gotta get to know them.
Exactly. And they can have different personalities with different people. Leviathan with me was very gentle, very smooth. And I recommended working with Leviathan to a friend of mine, and she came back with oh my God, it was like the Titanoboa scary as hell. How can you work with him? Like, because that's not how he is with me.
Correct.
So it drives me crazy when people post these questions. I'd like to work with Quanek. Can anyone tell me what he's like? It's like, are you asking for his coffee? Does he want a frappuccino? Does he want an espresso? No, it just doesn't work that way because my relationship is going to be different than anyone else's.
Well, right, because it's at that point with that spirit, this is where your personal biases, your life experiences, it's
Yeah,
all filtering through while you have that relationship.
yeah.
So it's funny that you bring up Leviathan. I mean, I love working with Leviathan.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, hell to the yeah,
Yep.
right? Same time, I know, again, I've heard other people are like, nope, not my deal. I'm like, all right, that is like, we're talking about the demonic side of water,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So that tells you about your personality in some ways where you're kind of at.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think people want to see that.
Yes, because I mean, what, the subconscious waters? It's
Yeah.
like
Could it mean you have some emotional issues you need to deal with?
maybe in the depths of your own shadows.
Yes.
Right? Like, this is where all this is coming from, a place of, look at your own experiences and,
Mhm.
be safe about it. I mean, I know Shay, I know Stephanie, I know Andrea, I know all of us would be like, yeah, do your research ahead of time,
Yeah.
right? See if this actually works for you. Do some
Mhm.
divinations, like, the basic, like,
Basic
safety
divination.
checks.
It doesn't have to be anything fancy. People think it has to be this whole big thing before they start the work. No, it can be as simple as meditating and asking, are you willing to work with me? Or is there something I
Hmm.
need to work on within myself before I go down this path? Because working
Right.
with the death current, it's not that it's different than any other current. I mean, because they all have their own thing, but it's definitely, it opens your eyes to the world and to yourself and to your relationships in a way that, just working on, say, love magic, love and lust, it's a very different, kind of perspective.
Well, it's a different aspect of life.
Yeah.
So this is where it's like, love, lust, all that's great. You can have that running all the time. This comes to a point of where is the balance? If you want the balance. If you don't want the balance, hey, like, good for you,
Don't
right?
tell us when everything goes to hell in a handbasket.
Or do, depending. We
Yes,
all have
that's true.
services.
That is true.
Shay does divinations, I do divinations, Andrea does a divination, Stephanie does divinations. We're all here for y'all.
Exactly. So if it does hit the fan, find one of us.
Find one of us. So this is where, let's go through some storytelling. So what general story do you have that was just kind of like, what in the hell, as an experience where it just kind of like woke you over? It's like, yeah, this is cool around this combination.
Oh gosh. Okay. An embarrassing one.
It
I
doesn't have to be embarrassing. It could be like legendary.
Oh, it is. It ended up being pretty legendary, but I felt like a fool in the interim.
Right.
Back in my 20s, was involved with a local coven. It's only four of us, 20-year-olds. We know it all. And our high priestess was supposed to do some, basically what I call now ascension work. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up on the ground. Apparently, the spirits were like, we don't want to talk with you. We want to talk with her.
Mm.
And I remember being in this red forest, and this small little impy looking thing came up and was like, I want to be with you, basically. I want to work with you. Okay.
All right.
21. Sure, why not? 3 weeks later, same thing happened. So by now the priestess is getting a little bit pissed off with me. And now there's two beings that want to work with me. So I went all through my 20s, my 30s, up until my late 40s, basically just calling them my little demons and learning from them. But it was very low key. And then I was doing some research on Erishkigal, and I came across this image, and it was exactly what I see when I see the first creature, the first being that came up to me. And I'm like, is this you? Uh-huh. Why didn't you tell me this was you? I've been calling you Ishadil, not Erishkigal. Why didn't you tell me who? You didn't have to know that at the time. So who's the other one? Oh, you'll figure that one out later. But you're on the right path. Welcome to Sem priesthood. It's like, oh. So even though I didn't realize I was being prepped to become a funerary priest, I had been working on it since my 20s, little by little by little.
Right.
And I look back and go, oh my God, I was such an idiot. The stuff that we did, I'm surprised I didn't get my astral self kicked to kingdom coming back.
Yes. But hey, you know how they work. They're just like, we're kicking it back. We're eating the popcorn. You do you, and we'll be there to help you when you ask.
Yep, exactly. But it definitely, when I realized who she was, it really made the relationship become that much deeper. And reading, the story and her perspective and why she became the queen of the underworld, it really touched me in a way that some of the other stories just really didn't.
Right. I mean, that's a personal bond there. We're talking about that personal connection, that personal relationship. So when you're reading the stories, again, this is a specific paradigm we're working through. So could you just summarize the story? I know there's a lot of pieces to that story, but just for the viewers.
But the brief one is Erishkigal was originally a priestess of the harvest, but saw those who had passed away just kind of being left to their own devices. And she took it upon herself, knowing that if she chose that job, that role, she could never return to the other side of life. So she took that on and became the mother of the great below and cared for everyone as best she could. And of course, her sister Inanna had to cause some mischief. So we have the trials of Inanna and how that fit in with Erishkigal. But so she does have her tough side, but there was also a gentle side there. I mean, who would take that kind of loss? What she works with, loss. You lost a life of freedom and of gentleness, of easiness to take on this role that is going to be kind of thankless.
Yeah. I mean, death has a lot of different metaphors. Death is silence, possibly. Right?
Yep.
So this is where I think that story, I mean, it really says, well, there is a loss piece to this. When you're working with death, there is losses. Death consumes.
Exactly.
So this is like, well, what is the thing that you're willing to give up here? Because, in the magical currents, there's always transformation. But when you're working death currents, it's very specific. It's like, well, what are you going to give up? Because you're not going to be the same. You can't be the same.
You can't come through it the same person. And if you did, you missed something somewhere. You either went just through the motions or you didn't do enough of the inner work. But if you can come through it and say, yeah, that was a piece of cake, I didn't sense any change, I'm either going to call bullshit or want to see your notes because something's not right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, having done playing necromancy work, it's very much like, oh, it's a weird dichotomy. You're in it, you're like, this sucks. And then you come out, you're like, I feel new. I feel reborn on whatever it is.
Yep, you do. And you find a new facet of yourself that it's like, wow, that's been hidden there for how long? This new aspect of me. I don't know too many processes that we can do as magicians that allow us to see that there's still more to be chipped away. As we lose one thing, we gain something else.
Mm-hmm. I know, like, definitely from my experience when I'm teaching Chinese medicine, people are like, well, how do you become a good acupuncturist? I'm like, you need to get good at death. Acupuncture is all about death currents.
Yeah.
This is a sword. This is cutting. And that's like, we could say, well, okay, use this eternal metaphor, but ultimately it's a death metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
With that.
Exactly.
And it's like, at that point, death has a lot of positive pieces.
Oh, it
Like,
does.
for me, it's like, all right, you can use a death current to kill something you don't want in your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of them, right?
Yep.
Working with the dead in particular, you really reflect on yourself, and you're like, all right, but there's a few other things that is good with working with the dead. Like, they understand you.
Yes, in ways that you don't understand yourself. And I think that's why with my day-to-day job, I get a lot of people who want to talk with loved ones who have deceased because they're looking for either closure, or they're looking to let something go, or they're looking for forgiveness and permission to live a life.
Mm-hmm. Because this is one, if we're looking at that permission to live a life, aren't they already dead at that point? Like, that's
Mhm.
the odd contextual piece there. If
Yeah,
you're not living, you're dying.
you're dying. Yeah, you've
So
put
you might as well
everything
take the
forward.
plunge.
Yes, so you delve into it, get whatever release you have to, and then hopefully find that spark again underneath all those dead layers, and Baphometic fire in the phoenix come back up.
Right. So this is where, I mean, working from that perspective, I mean, Damon's going to kick her butt on this in particular.
Yes.
So really, when we start breaking it down even further, I know a lot of people would be like, well, control the dead. If anyone does necromantic work, you never do that. Or if you do, I mean, I'll be straight, you're a dick about it.
Yeah, no kidding.
So how does that current work when you're using the daemons as an intermediary? Because, to the dead, they'd be like, what the hell is this possibly, right?
Right. My experience is that once someone is dead, they seem to understand the different energies and spirits that are going to be kind of wafting in and out. So I have yet to have anyone go, what the hell was that? And who the hell are you?
Right.
It's usually more of a, okay, I don't recognize you, but who are you? And should something or someone end up getting a little bitchy,
Mm-hmm.
the demons are there to make sure that they leave when they are asked to leave.
Right. So you could see right from the get-go, the way you're working with it, it would not be the stereotype that most people think. It'd be like, here's a demon, boom, and like whipping the dead type of thing. It's very much like they're there as a council, more
Yeah.
so, to back you
Yeah.
up.
They're the bailiff in the court. Just
Mm-hmm.
keep everything running smoothly, make sure both sides have a chance to have their say, but nobody gets too uppity. And if someone gets
Right.
uppity, they're escorted right out of the courtroom. It's very
Right.
much that kind of energy. And I
Right.
prefer it that way.
Well, order is nice in this context,
Yes,
right?
it is. It really is.
And then this is where, at least, we're talking about the dead in general. How do you find this with ancestor work?
I don't seem to need as much of the demonic energy simply because there's already that familial tie.
Mm-hmm.
They're still there, but they're kind of they're behind the curtain, I guess is the best
Right.
way to describe it. They let me have my time and do my work and learn what I need to. And then I've never had a problem with an ancestor saying, I'm not going back. It's more of a, we've taught you what you need. We're gonna take our leave now.
Right. And then there's so many different types of, well, death spirits you can work with on this as
Yeah.
points.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure you have your personal favorites. I think everyone does.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. And a lot of it also depends on the situation that I find myself in. When I was doing paranormal investigation and I knew I was going into one house that we had already gone into for the interview, and it was heavy and disgusting and dark, I do henna. I love doing henna. And I actually put Murmur's sigil on my hands
Mm.
as my way of just having that extra energy there to make sure that if something got in my face, I had that extra backup. Just like on the back of my neck, I have sigils.
Right.
Yeah, no one else is going to know what they are, but I know what they're there for. They're just to make sure that any situation I walk into, I've got a little extra boost of confidence and protection coming in with me.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a pro tip right there, peeps, using sigils. Obviously, don't be putting spiritual sigils on yourself if you don't have relationships with those spirits. Make sure you got like a buddy system working with them first before you do that.
Exactly. Exactly. I've got Leviathan, I have Uri, and then I've got Atem, because that was the temple that I was first initiated into.
Mm-hmm.
And little by little, there'll be some more added to that as I go.
Right, right. Just keep adding to the roster.
Exactly. And people see the one for Uri and go, "Oh, are you a Sagittarius? Are you an Aries?" I'm like, "No." Then what is that? It's a sigil for a demon of death.
What up? That's
Oh, that's different. That was like the nurses this week at my surgery. They're like, "Oh, those are some very interesting tattoos. What do they mean?" You really don't want to know.
they are pretty pictures I use to make my life better.
Exactly. Well, the lotus means this.
Yeah, I mean, with that, I mean, I'm trying to even think where people would be like, "What's this?" I'm like, "It's this, beeps."
Yeah.
So,
Well, just a drop of
and
water on my neck. No big deal.
it is, and even talking about from a perspective with different spirits of death, or just even the daemons of death,
Hmm.
the interactions are so different between each of them. So, with the necromancy piece added, it really is. I'm sure you like, what are some practical pieces? I mean, when people think necromancy, they're not usually thinking, oh, it's just like it's communication. I mean,
Right.
I remember us having the conversation about divination
Yeah.
previously on the other podcast we had with you
Yep.
a while back. However, what are other implementation tools in terms of like results that people can expect with the dead, and why are they different than just working with the straight daemons on this?
That's a good question. And I don't really know. I think that you have to personalize your other tools that you use, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
which demons you work with or tangible tools that you bring in with you.
Right.
Um, some people do fabulous without anything, and
Mm-hmm.
I just blows me away that they can come in and kind of like wipe the Cheeto dust off their hands and make everything work, and they don't have negative ramifications. Other
Mm-hmm.
people try that and they're going to be in a little corner crying, looking for mommy and their stuffed teddy bear.
Right. So a lot of customizations based on you.
Yes, a whole lot. Get to know your elemental breakdown.
Right.
Um, I think we probably have talked that to death a couple of times too, all of us, between Steph and I and you and Andrea. But get to know your breakdown, because some people are going to be more connected with the current and it's going to come very easily. Some people, they're really going to have to work at it. So they may need a little extra oomph.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are one of the lucky, unlucky ones, as I call it, who has a really in touch with that current, you may need to learn how to tone it down so that it doesn't become a cacophony in your life.
Oh, absolutely. I remember like Andrieh walked into my house. I was going through a whole Saturnal thing because I was like, since we did that challenge back in the day, I
Oh
was in a
yeah.
little bit of a Saturnal world. I was like, Andrieh walks into my house and is like, dude, it looks like a cave in here. I'm like, feels good to me.
There you go.
Right? It was all like, it's pretty much like it was black curtains, everything. It was basically like
Oh
a
wow.
full on cave, but it was such a slip of the mind because it's like, what was it? We had our friendly competition there.
Yep.
Andrieh went Sorath. I decided to go YOLO with a buy ritual where it was like Zazel, Cassio, and Planetary Gateway. Fuck
Yeah,
it.
simple thing you do on a Friday night.
Right, simple thing. It was 30-day challenge. I mean, you guys definitely had really awesome techniques posted too for that.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're like, this is great,
Yeah,
and this is where it's like, but that time span that was only for 30 days for that challenge. And from a Saturn current, I was like, all right, what's the next thing I'm going to do? Shiva work, Kali work,
oh gosh, yeah.
right? It's like, but that's right in that Saturnal death current, and
Yes,
I
it
didn't
is.
even notice I was in it. And then I started looking at things in my life. I was like, well, okay, I'm just going to keep doing more necromantic work. Screw it. But it was such an unconscious slip
Mm-hmm.
on this.
It can
It's
be.
like, and it's like, I wasn't aware of it, even though, we do this stuff professionally, all of us.
Yeah.
And that was a time in my life that definitely made a huge impact. Right.
Mm-hmm. And I
So
think
this is where,
you're drawn to it at the right time too, when you do need to
mhm,
slough off all of that doesn't serve you anymore.
right. And that really was like, there was a time for death. There was a time for getting into that type of work and that
Mm-hmm.
intensity. And then there was a time to get out of that. Right. But
Yep.
this is the thing, at least with those death currents, it's, you don't know sometimes. Like,
No, you
it
don't.
just slips because it's like, well, if you're comfortable with it, well, you're just like, eh.
Yep. And you don't realize that something as simple as going through your, your phone book, your friends group, and going, they're toxic, haven't seen them in ages, and whittling that down, or what I call with my clients, weeding the garden.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beginning of death work. You have just cut off, you've scythed those individuals and their energies out of your life. Now, where's it going to go next? Is it going to stay there, or are you going to continue that and start changing? I don't know, maybe how you take care of yourself. Maybe you get rid of some of those bad habits, like drinking Coca-Cola like I do, and drink water
Hey,
instead.
it's all right. I'm all there. It's ice creams for me right now, but I choose to have ice cream. See?
Exactly. But you're right. It is a very slippery slope once you start it and you see the changes that it does bring. And if you're doing it right, yes, it might be a little messy in the interim, but you
Mm-hmm.
start seeing the positive outcomes. It kind of gets a little addicting.
Oh, absolutely. It's like, again, my friggin' place of living looked like a friggin' cave. I was like,
Right.
well, I go back to my man cave. It's nice and dark. It's cool. But that's not life affirming.
No.
Like, it's life affirming in the death current ways, but it's not life affirming if I'm trying to build something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I was pretty
Yep.
much like, if we had to use the tarot for people as equivalency, it's like I was playing that. I was playing the hermit pretty hard on
I was
that.
just saying that you were definitely hermiting. You were Lancelot in the forest with the long hair, just going, ooh, I'm finding
Yeah,
myself.
I'm like, I don't need nobody. I just stay in my cave. It's my
Yeah.
apartment. I got a TV. I got a computer. I'm good. I'm good.
Takeout is delivered. We're fine.
Right. So this is where when you're talking about necromancy work for, listeners, viewers, you got to keep a track journal. Seriously. Like, this would be across the board for any work, but especially death work,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know how much you're actually going to be cutting,
Yeah.
and you lose track of that. So this is where it's like, especially when we're talking about these more intense currents with
Mm-hmm.
like demonology and necromancy, is like demons will screw with you for your betterment, but
Yes,
they
they
are like
will.
a hammer.
They are. They're not a little tap tap hammer. They're the big ass one. And if you need them to be that harsh for your own betterment, they will be.
Absolutely, it's like well, I always call them a 2x4, right? It's a
Yes.
2x4 over the head, and this is where it's like that's beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely beneficial, right?
Exactly.
If you need the wake up call, they're not going to hold back on that.
No, no, they're not. They're not going to pussyfoot around. They're not going to hold your hand and wipe your tears. It's going to be you need to figure this shit out now.
Mm-hmm.
Figure it out your way, or we're going to do it our way.
And their way is a fast, hard line.
Mm-hmm. For some people that I work with who don't know my background in demonology, I kind of liken it to a parent who've
Mm-hmm.
asked you several times to clean your room. Clean your room, clean your room, clean your room, clean your room. And then you go to school and they go in your room with some construction sized trash bags and clean all that shit out. And they don't care what they've just thrown away. It could be your favorite book from your childhood. It's gone. That you have
Mm-hmm.
been given a bitch slap from the universe.
Yup, that's a good way of putting it.
That usually gets to them like, oh, I understand now. I'm like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, these. If you understand the history of these spirits and the geography of what cultures they came from, you understand why they ain't going to be screwing around.
Exactly. They're not going to be warm and fuzzy. They're not the neo-Victorian images of angels, which we could go off on what the real angels
We
look
could
like.
totally go off on that
Oh my
all
gosh,
night.
very easily. But no, you have to see it for what they are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to liken it to a primal current, but it's much closer to a primal current in some ways.
Yes. Yes, it is. I agree.
So with that, Shay, we're hitting the 42-minute mark on things. So is there anything you'd like to say wrapping up?
Don't be afraid of doing death work. It really isn't something to be terrified of or afraid of, but go into it smart. Go into it knowing that if you haven't done the work, if you don't know your own fears, that you're going to have a chunk of time where that's what they're going to be sending you. But you will be a better person, at least I think, and a far stronger magician if you can get comfortable with that current and use that energy to make the right changes in your own life.
Wise words. So if they wanted to get in contact with you or find more information, where would they go?
They would go to demonology.org.
There
Same
you
place
go.
you can find Steph, and she and I are actually working on a second book. It should be out later this summer.
Yes.
Yes, on the Demon Queens.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I'm enjoying working on this one.
Yeah, we'll definitely have both of you on for that one.
Oh,
So,
fantastic. We would love that.
yeah, I mean, Daemons and Queens. I mean, I already got a few pop up in my head where they're like, hey, hello, hello. I'm like, not yet. We'll
Not
have
yet.
that conversation
A little bit
later.
later.
So, with that, thank you for popping on.
My pleasure.
And with that, get her book, Meditations on Death, also.
Yep, it's
And
under the
then
name JC DeCesare.
there you go. So, this is Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole as a podcast, Queen City Curio Apothecary video cast. If you guys are watching us on YouTube, Andrieh will be with us next week with Rufus Opus. That's going to be great. And guess what? We're going to be talking about Goetics. So we're still on the same theme. So Andrieh had some obligations today. That's why he's not with us. However, next week he'll be back and we'll be talking about Goetic stuff. So keeping right to that theme, all the fun stuff. If you're in Toronto, Canada, you can visit us at our store, 607 Gerrard Street East, Unit 41402, and then you can always become a tin sponsor. Currently, we're working on the chakra series where we're going to be covering the throat chakra next. We've gone through all the previous chakras, working with raw materials, meditations, energy work, and then as a sponsor member, you'll be getting access to our physical library back here. You can see a few of the books behind me. If you're on the video, we have 4 more shelves full of books, so you can get access to that. And then you'll also get online access to all the workshops we've done in the last 2.5 years. So we do have Damon work with that because we did do the Kabbalah. So we had some people who were like, well, can we do some Damon work while we're doing the Archangel? We're like, hell yeah, you can. You're a sponsor. We'll do that for you. So we have those recordings for those rituals and many, many more. So thank you for joining us this week. We'll be back next week. Thank you, Shay, for joining. And with that, have a great night, everyone.
Good night.